welcome. So to start today's episode, just a few comments, a few observations about my own practice. It may be something that you're facing as well, or can certainly relate to what I'm about to say. It seems to be that there's been many thoughts about being present, but there hasn't been a huge consistency in being in the present moment. Perhaps much of that can be pointed to my mental health and the challenges that arise with that. So there is the thought or the wanting to be present, but it often remains as just the thought. Almost as if the mind has slipped in and is trying to say that the thought about being present is good enough. You can now come back to mind. Of course, with the difficulty with mind and the energy of mind, especially my circumstances, it's has a great magnetic pull to remain in the mind. Part of that is to do with the idea or the thought of being heard, the difficulties of the mind that I'm experiencing, for that to be heard, whether through labels, through explanations, to be almost validated. So the way I see it is these things are only relatively important. In the ultimate importance, there is just the simplicity of this moment. But that's not to say that I can ignore all the rest, or the rest, needs to be ignored. There is for me at least, I believe there is a time and there is a place to address certain difficulties. For me, it's dysfunction of the mind. So there's almost a balance that I'm trying to strike, where it's assessing the health of the mind, getting help in that regard, and getting clarity on that as well. So I'm in the process of doing, and then there is the main practice of being in the here and now. And I found it difficult to come back to the present moment. Once I've gone into mind, or I've given my attention to the thoughts and assessing myself and some things I can do to get some clarification in regards to mental health. And it's been quite difficult to then step out of that mind stream and back to the present moment. It's almost as if the mind is saying you need to stay in this mind stream for for it to continue, for the actions you want to happen, for those to happen, you need to stay with the thoughts. That the moment you drop them, then you'll be mentally lost once again. There'll be no help. So in some ways it can be complex when you look at, I look at my issues I'm going through with the mind and the layers within that, and then on another level it's very simple. There's the mind energy and there is the now. Sometimes you can acknowledge the complexity of the situation, you can also acknowledge the simplicity as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other. The simplicity is that there is just this moment. The simplicity is, can you accept what is in this moment? And the what is to the mind may seem like injustice, or may seem unfair, may seem this, may seem that. But in the now, it just is. There is no mental commentary, there is no, in the now, perhaps it's accurate to say there is no unfairness in the now. One thing I've noticed also is the relief and the healing qualities of the present moment, where I find myself in the mind and a huge amount of stressful thoughts, perhaps some fear as well. And then the contrast of being able to step into the now out of necessity to survive. The thoughts were so difficult to deal with that there was, and I noticed almost a tranquility just stepping in from this huge rainstorm, dark clouds around you, and then suddenly the clear sky. So it seems as if, many situations, yes, there are challenges there, but they can also teach us a great deal. And for me, it's the unwellness of being deep in thought, ruminating, analysing, and again, there's a place to take time out to analyse certain things and address them, take action, plan. But then there's the noticing when it becomes an unhealthy, it has an unhealthy impact on health. So for me it was clear that yes, there were still things that needed to be, or potentially needed to be fought through, but in this moment there was a great deal of mental pain. So if I was to continue down this path of grinding away to try and get clarity in thought and in the mind, it could be very damaging there. So there's a moment of acknowledging that. And for me, what I did is I did some journaling, a little bit of journaling, and And within the journaling, there was the acknowledgement that, okay, this is enough. Now it's time to drop this for the moment. And get some rest from our thoughts. Step into what's real, the reality of now. So that's something I'm facing with, the attraction, the pull of being in thoughts, and perhaps that is covering up the time spent in the present moment. Maybe it's also the desire to be present as well is not there. Sometimes it's very strong to want to step into the present moment, to be aware, but perhaps this is all mind. That there is thoughts of not being motivated or desire to be present when, of course, there's always acknowledging the essence of who we are, which is awareness itself. So perhaps it's important to distinguish the duality in certain statements that we can say, and so in some ways it's not the true me that's not motivated, it's the mind-made self that doesn't want to be present. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it wants to be in alignment of now, it wants to. Other times it wants my attention, my awareness, to focus, to be within the thoughts, to be within the pain. And we just touched upon, gone through the chapter of pain body, and one of the elements of pain body when it wants to feed is it wants your thoughts, it wants your attention. It's the way it stays alive. So sometimes it can be quite subtle when sometimes it's not easy to distinguish, is this pain body or is this just the energy of mind? I think Eckhart gives one example to distinguish whether this is a movement of the pain body where, trying to think of the words he uses, where something, the reaction doesn't equal the cause. Like an example, if someone cuts you off when you're driving, or there's some sort of small disagreement, and then from that there's a huge reaction that doesn't equal that. By the end of that you may feel like, I don't want to live my life anymore. And you can kind of sense that you're not reacting just to that moment, that either disagreement or that it's now provoked the pain body, where now you're thinking about everything in your life, and it doesn't equate the reaction to perhaps being a bit upset about somebody doing something to you. Now it equates to so much more than that. And I may not have put this in the clearest way. There's actually a word that Eckhart uses to clearly explain this, but it doesn't seem to come to my mind in this way. But just a note, if your reaction is out of balance to the cause of something, then it's a clear, very likely then it's triggered the pain body, the movement of that. So it doesn't feel like there's any real plan needed in this, because again, plan means time, and time is not in the now. So we can always be tempted, or I can be tempted to be saying, okay, for this next week I'm going to try and be present, and this doesn't seem to, there's nothing wrong with that in some ways, but it doesn't seem to work for me right now. Perhaps it's just taking this moment, being aware of recording this episode, and being aware that it acts as an anchor to be present in order for me to speak and to record. Presence is needed. Nothing is rehearsed or remembered or scripted. It is just talking directly out of the experience. And recently I've been recording some mental health vlogs, which is all quite new to me. I'm usually, I feel quite comfortable sitting here with just a microphone and audio, but with the vlogs there's a camera, and so just recently uploading to YouTube and it's been a bit scary to perhaps mention it here, because there's a certain side of me here. This is obviously a more focused on spiritual practice and the present moment. The way I'm talking is going to be in a different way to how I'd come across on the vlogs. Perhaps there was some fear or anxiety about being found out. Right. Obviously, listening to these podcasts, it's easy to make an impression about the person talking here. Certain ideas that he must be very spiritual, this person, and other presumptions which are natural to mind to be curious. So the idea of the vlogs are just to talk a little bit more in depth in regards to my mental health and my journey with my mental health, and the main purpose of me doing it is more just as an outlet, an outpouring of things. So it's been a little bit difficult to kind of to find its place for that, if it's useful, if it's going to harm or affect my sort of presence practice. Is it sometimes, the present moment, it gives you an almost, you can almost check in with that when you take an action, when you do something. You can sense if is this mind, or is this coming from a deeper space. So with the vlogs themselves, that's something I need to figure out. If it's something it's just a mind talking, it's mind movements, or is there also something deeper there that's at work that can help? And of course this goes to how it's received as well. In this practice, we want to kind of give in this way, where it's not the little me, the mind and the energy. There's almost a transparency in our essence, sort of merging into our actions, our speech, and it's coming from that space. So I may be brave and include a link to those vlogs below, and they're not really designed for entertainment, such as these episodes. It's more just a diary of what I'm going through, and it's just a way to release, to talk about things, and perhaps there can never be too much awareness and talk about our mental health. So that's one thing I've noted as well. Okay, so let's continue with where we left off. And we are in chapter 6 of Breaking Free. And the passage we are reading is The Return of the Pain Body. I sat down at a table and ordered a meal. There were a few other guests. At a nearby table, there was a middle-aged man in a wheelchair who was just finishing his meal. He glanced at me once, briefly but intensely. A few minutes passed. Suddenly he became restless, agitated. His body began twitching. The waiter came to take his plate. The man started arguing with him. The food was no good. It was dreadful. Then why did you eat it? Asked the waiter. And that really set him off. He started shouting, became abusive. Vile words were coming out of his mouth. Intense, violent hatred filled the room. One could feel that energy entering the cells of one's body, looking for something to latch onto. Now he was shouting at the other guests too, but for some strange reason ignoring me completely as I sat in intense presence. I suspected that the universal human pain body had come back to tell me, "You thought you defeated me. Look, I'm still here." I also considered the possibility that the released energy field left behind after our session followed me to the restaurant and attached itself to the one person in whom it found a compatible vibrational frequency, that is to say, a heavy pain body. The manager opened the door. "Just leave, just leave." The man zoomed out in his electric wheelchair, leaving everyone stunned. 1 minute later, he returned. His pain body wasn't finished yet. It needed more. He pushed open the door with his wheelchair, shouting obscenities. A waitress tried to stop him from coming in. He put his chair in fast forward and pinned her against a wall. Other guests jumped up and tried to pull him away, shouting, screaming, pandemonium. A little later, a policeman arrived. The man became quiet, was asked to leave and not return. The waitress, fortunately, was not hurt, except for bruises on her legs. When it was all over, the manager came to my table and asked me, half joking but perhaps feeling intuitively that there was some connection, "Did you cause all this?" The next passage is titled The Pain Body in Children. Children's pain bodies sometimes manifest as moodiness or withdrawal. The child becomes sullen, refuses to interact, and may sit in a corner, hugging a doll or sucking a thumb. They can also manifest as weeping fits or temper tantrums. The child screams, may throw him or herself on the floor, or become destructive. Thwarted wanting can easily trigger the pain body, and in developing ego, the force of wanting can be intense. Parents may watch helplessly in incomprehension and disbelief as their little angel becomes transformed within a few seconds into a little monster. Where does all that unhappiness come from? They wonder. To a greater or lesser extent, it is the child's share of the collective pain body of humanity, which goes back to the very origin of the human ego. But the child may also already have taken on pain from his or her parents' pain bodies, and so the parents may see in the child a reflection of what is also in them. Highly sensitive children are particularly affected by their parents' pain bodies. Having to witness their parents' insane drama causes almost unbearable emotional pain, and so it is often these sensitive children who grow into adults with heavy pain bodies. Children are not fooled by parents who try to hide their pain body from them, who say to each other, "We mustn't fight in front of the children." This usually means, while the parents make polite conversation, the home is pervaded with negative energy. Suppressed pain bodies are extremely toxic, even more so than openly active ones, and the psychic toxicity is absorbed by the children and contributes to the development of their own pain body. Some children learn subliminally about ego and pain body simply by living with very unconscious parents. A woman whose parents both had strong egos and heavy pain bodies told me that often when her parents were shouting and screaming at each other, she would look at them, and although she loved them, would say to herself, "These people are nuts. How did I ever end up here?" There was already an awareness in her of the insanity of living in such a way. That awareness helped reduce the amount of pain she absorbed from her parents. Parents often wonder how to deal with their child's pain body. The primary question is, of course, are they dealing with their own? Do they recognize it within themselves? Are they able to stay present enough when it becomes activated so that they can be aware of the emotion on the feeling level before it gets a chance to turn into thinking and thus into an unhappy person? While the child is having a pain body attack, there isn't much you can do except to stay present so that you are not drawn into an emotional reaction. The child's pain body would only feed on it. Pain bodies can be extremely dramatic. Don't buy into the drama. Don't take it too seriously. If the pain body was triggered by thwarted wanting, don't give in now to its demands. Otherwise, the child will learn, the more unhappy I become, the more likely I am to get what I want. This is a recipe for dysfunction in later life. The pain body will be frustrated by your non-reaction and may briefly act up even more before it subsides. Fortunately, pain body episodes in children are usually more short-lived than in adults. A little while after it has subsided, or perhaps the next day, you can talk to the child about what happened. But don't tell the child about the pain body. Ask questions instead. For example, what was it that came over you yesterday when you wouldn't stop screaming? Do you remember? What did it feel like? Was it a good feeling? That thing that came over you, does it have a name? No? If it had a name, what would it be called? If you could see it, what would it look like? Can you paint a picture of what it would look like? What happened to it when it went away? Did it go to sleep? Do you think it may come back? These are just a few suggested questions. All these questions are designed to awaken the witnessing faculty in the child, which is presence. They will help the child to disidentify from the pain body. You may also want to talk to the child about your own pain body, using the child's terminology. The next time the child gets taken over by the pain body, you can say, "It's come back, hasn't it?" Use whatever words the child used when you talked about it. Direct the child's attention to what it feels like. Let your attitude be one of interest or curiosity, rather than one of criticism and condemnation. It is unlikely that this will stop the pain body in its tracks, and it may appear that the child will not even be hearing you, yet some awareness will remain in the background of the child's consciousness, even while the pain body is active. After a few times, the awareness will have grown stronger and the pain body will have weakened. The child is growing in presence. One day you may find that the child is the one to point out to you that your own pain body has taken control of you. And we will pause it there at the end of that passage. So we were given another story, a real life kind of experience from Eckhart, and we mentioned earlier, or I mentioned my liking of the stories and the teaching points of that, and where he talked about the return of the pain body. So in this passage there was two sort of main points that were made. The first being the kind of continuous or pain body of the customer in the restaurant, who had a sort of pain body reaction to the food, and then came back and wasn't done. The pain body wanted more. And there was Eckhart's own acknowledgement of the universal pain body. Not sure if at the time there was a personal pain body for him, but just want to highlight a couple of sentences as Eckhart narrated this story. And he says here that now he was shouting at the other guests too, but for some strange reason ignoring me completely as I sat in intense presence. I find that quite reassuring and quite inspiring there too. I can kind of mention myself of people being very angry or pain body reactions when driving especially, and it's nice to read sort of Eckhart's own personal actions he took during that time. And it re-emphasizes that as well when we come across a pain body, when it's either directed to us or it's close by, that there's usually very little to do there. You can't talk back to a pain body. But by being in intense presence, it allows you, it almost keeps you protected from having an emotional reaction yourself in that way, that it triggers your own pain body. And being in intense presence, if there's anything that needs to be done, it can be done from there. If there's anything that needs to be said, it can be said from there. And then we moved on to a passage of the pain body in children, which I thought was incredibly insightful for those who are parents or interact with children and who have family, younger children. That's sure it's something everyone can take something from. And there were some great instructions there as well about the type of questions to ask the child, and also the caution of not telling the child about the pain body, but allow the child to almost openly experience it, not to give it a concept, because I can imagine telling the child this is what this is. There may not be the awareness to not label and to take that as a concept, but to almost feel a direct experience of what it is and allow the child to recognize it within themselves. So, as Eckhart says, as it happens again and again, soon there'll be more awareness, a stronger awareness, and a weakened pain body. And it's a great way for the child to feel empowered by that as well. If he uses his own language to come up with a name, so it. And a sentence I highlight from this passage was to let your attitude be one of interest or curiosity rather than one of criticism or condemnation. And there's quite a funny sentence at the end, which is, I'm sure it's been true for many different people, where the child has pointed out to you about your pain body. So it says here, one day you may find that the child is the one to point out to you that your own pain body has taken control of you. So I'm going to leave the reading there. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I wish you well in this moment, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Take care.